going to conclude survey research with a really brief video/talk on questions and answers, mainly questions on survey items. I have sort of two goals. Let me start by saying that I believe the knowledge base material, the assigned material, is really, really good. So, and much more thorough than this little brief excursion will wind up being. The goal here is to sort of increase your awareness as a consumer of survey research. The results of survey data are ubiquitous; they're everywhere. Anytime you're involved in looking for news on anything, you find survey data, and sometimes you see survey results that don't seem to make sense. Maybe this talk will give you some insight into why sometimes we produce survey results that make no sense at all. Also, neither the knowledge base nor this brief talk get into any detail into what is an enormous literature, even kind of a discipline in social science, almost unto itself, called item response theory. And there's an enormous amount of material there. So if you become a quantitative person and deal with surveys, then this literature, item response theory, is where you're going to go. Enormous opportunities for data people, especially you Republicans. They have had trouble getting data people on board. This is just really sort of the foundational stuff to talk about questions and first off, different types of questions and why you would use one over the other. The open-ended question doesn't provide the respondent with an answer set. It asks a question and then allows, if it's everyone in all the respondent pool, everybody's in English, an English language response crafted by the respondent that can be rich or it can be not so rich. A really common question in political science surveys, and sometimes it's done very early in academic surveys done by political scientists, is called the most important problem question. And the question goes like this: what do you believe is the most important problem facing the United States today? And the results from that question, the answers, are really, really powerful. And they're more powerful than the researcher laying out a set of issues that he or she might believe is a big problem in the United States today, and having the respondent rank them, because you're getting stuff right off the top of the head. And you see, we have so much data these days on the most important problem question tracked over time, it being an open-ended question. So much data, you can see problems emerge, sometimes before reporters and journalists have realized that these things are issues that many, sometimes most Americans find important. You can see across this century, the years in this century, responses to the open-ended survey question, most important problem, range from early terrorism and stability or instability in the Middle East, the wars going on in the early part of the century in Iraq and Afghanistan, not maybe even fully complete today, but once upon a time considered by large majorities of Americans as the most important. You get that in the open-ended. You might miss it if you just thought we were focused in say 2003 on a recession. People are still focused on security, and you can find that in the open-ended question. You'll find, of course, through the Bush years that the responses to the open-ended question changed from security abroad and homeland security to economic security and economic concerns as the economy crashed in 2008. So open-ended questions are good, and then let the respondents identify for themselves what's important. Closed-ended are easier to handle, so you give a response set that contains a mutually exclusive and exhaustive set of responses, and they're easy to code, and you can make them into the ordinal, sometimes even make a ratio, like, scale, and they're easier to handle and analyze. But again, it requires knowledge. Sometimes it's good to ask an open-ended question and sort of a pre-test of your survey, and then from it ask a series of closed-ended questions, having already identified things that are important to large groups. Question wording. Got several issues here. This says leading, this says threatening, this says double barrel, and this says tone. To try to speak a little bit of, these are things you don't want, and when there are leading questions, you're going to get results that can be quirky. So if you see different reports from different survey organizations about what people think of the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, known as Obamacare, if the question was leading the respondent to answer one way or the other, of course you're going to get different estimates. If you see things that are unusual, try to track down the question wording and see if something in it would have led respondents to feel uncomfortable choosing one side, comfortable choosing the other. Threatening, what I mean by this is sensitive. Don't make people feel threatened. These questions can end a survey and cause hang-ups if it's on the telephone, or wrinkle things up, throw it in the trash if it's mail and so forth, or close the window if it's done by internet. Asking people about sensitive things makes them feel threatened, and threatening questions tend to end surveys and make for bad data. When I was in survey research, we always asked the income question last, because that's the one most likely to turn people off. You want to know how much money I make? Oh my God, are you with the IRS? And we asked, moreover, the income question in a specific non-threatening way. We would ask, okay, I'm going to read you a series of categories, and I want you to stop me when I get to the category that includes your family's total income last year before taxes. And then just start reading the categories and let them be big, not very specific. That makes people feel less threatened. A double barrel question is a question that really asks two things at once. So say you have a battery of items where you're asking the respondent to agree or disagree, and you're sort of going to build an ordinal scale from the responses. So you agree or disagree with a particular statement. The Democratic Party is the better of the two parties at representing poor people and elderly people. Agree or disagree? Well, that's double-barreled. Poor people and elderly people, and the individual respondent might have a different perspective on the Democratic Party's fit with those two different demographics. So a double-barrel question asks two things at once. A good way to spot a double-barrel question is to look for the word "and," A-N-D, and. So tone can affect the responses too. The tone of a question and the tone of a question's wording. You can think of any example. You change the words, you change the results. You change the words, you change the answers. Change the question wording, change the answers. I want to know about how people feel about abortion. Let's say, for example, and I'm going to include questions about abortion in a survey project. If I use the term ending a pregnancy, a woman's right to end a pregnancy, and a woman's right to an abortion, I'm going to get two different sets of answers, even though those words meant, qualitatively to me, they meant the same thing. Some people attach a sort of pejorative meaning to the term abortion that they would not attach to the term ending a pregnancy. And so just you can think of, and I'm going to encourage you in class to do it, many examples of how you could get the wrong answer, or the better way to put it is get different answers across different surveys depending on the tone attached to the question wording. Last, order. Question order is, in my opinion, an understudied phenomenon. Question order effects, even though decades and decades and decades, for decades, we've known that question order is really important in terms of what comes out at the end. The theory behind question order effects is very, very sophisticated, and practitioners, I think, are sometimes less attentive than maybe they should be. You see differences that really can't be accounted for by sampling error, often cropping up in questions related, for example, or results related to, let's choose presidential approval. Why does one poll have President Obama's approval rating really low and another one have it quite a bit higher? Well, it could be, as we'll see, sampling error, but I think many times what I did in the measurement section, many times it's the preparation of the measurement. It's done by two different groups, two different polling outfits, and sometimes it can be unaware or sometimes aware of what's known as non-separable preferences. Obamacare, I believe, I should check this, I should have checked this before I started the camera. I think Obamacare is still unpopular to the extent that a majority of Americans, just simply asked about whether they favor it or oppose it, will say they oppose it. And it's been even more unpopular. Back in 2011, it was more unpopular, I think, than it is now. So in that legislation, the Affordable Care Act, is the signature piece of legislation of the Obama administration thus far, both terms. It's a gigantic bill that was passed in 2010 when Democrats controlled both houses of Congress and, of course, the presidency. It's an overhaul over time of the healthcare delivery system and how we pay for it in the country. It changes a lot of things about the operation of healthcare in the U.S., and kind of as a result, it's very unpopular and remains, as a bulk, it remains unpopular. And yet there are all kinds of non-separable preferences. What I mean is, by non-separable preferences is, so you have, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? Well, they're related. What you think about this and that, and the order in which you ask people about this and that can produce an effect, upward or downward, depending upon the nature of the relationship. So, for example, if a polling house is interested in keeping tabs on presidential approval, Gallup certainly is, over time, and they're also interested over time in keeping tabs on preferences in the U.S. about Obamacare, the order in which they ask those two questions will give them different answers every time. So you need to randomize those things when possible. So if you ask a sample about their Obamacare and a big group of them don't like it, then you ask them if they approve or disapprove of the president, they're more likely to disapprove of the president than they would have been had you asked the presidential approval question first. These problems can also relate not just to separate sort of targets, Obamacare, Obama himself, but sort of in the shape of a funnel, things that are related. So up here you've got Obamacare. And maybe you want a yes or no, or approve or disapprove from your respondent. But Obamacare's got lots of working parts. So go down into the funnel, and at the end of the day, you're going to find sort of particular elements of Obamacare turn out to be wildly popular. Wildly popular. Part of the law, the ACA, forbids insurance companies from excluding people who have pre-existing conditions. This is a wildly popular idea in the mass public. It's not a sort of Democratic or Republican split there. I mean, I suppose there is an opinion, but the large majority of Americans believe that insurance companies shouldn't do that. The law forbids them from doing that when before they could. That's very popular. But if you ask about Obamacare first, and then identify that issue, and recognize and sort of explain to the respondent that that's part of what the law did, you get a different answer. So survey researchers have to be extraordinarily careful and even artful in the sense of thinking about how these things might work out and crafting the order of the questions. Many times they're not. In some of the houses, what we call preparations in the measurement discussion, some of the houses have habits when they ask questions in particular orders. This group might ask them in a different order, and many of us believe that the differences in the results that certain polling houses produce, given the same questions, for example, presidential approval, are a result of sort of routine question order effects, and these things need to be accounted for. Again, I believe the assigned material, reading materials, and it's much more thorough on the issue of questions and question order, and I think correctly identifies the spirit of the process of putting together a survey, which is to be really thoughtful about the person who has to respond to the survey and sort of treating their time as if it were your own, So that's the end of the survey research set.